Well, I'm Tom Hartman in Washington, D.C., and here's what's coming up tonight on The Big Picture. In the wake of the George Zimmerman not guilty verdict, the American Legislative Exchange Council, a.k.a. ALEC, is back in the news again. But while you probably know about that group's support for stand your ground and shoot first laws, you likely haven't heard of its plan to end public school as we know it. More on that with Mike Papantonio in just a moment. You need to know this. The Koch brothers and their buddies in the American Legislative Exchange Council are coming for your kids' elementary school. A new report from the Center for Media and Democracy's PR Watch says that the American Legislative Exchange Council, the conservative lobbying group, more commonly known as ALEC, has ramped up its campaign to corporatize our public schools during the first half of this year. Since January, conservative lawmakers across the country have attached to their state's budget bills 139 different ALEC-drafted education proposals. 31 of those proposals have been signed into law, disguised with pleasant-sounding names like the Virtual Schools Act and the Special Needs Scholarship Act. These proposals chip away at the most fundamental of American rights, the right to free and effective education, all under the guise of buzzwords like parental choice. The aforementioned Special Needs Scholarship Act, for example, gives money to families of students with learning disabilities so that their kids can enroll in local, for-profit, somebody-makes-a-buck schools. The only problem with this nice-sounding policy is that the for-profit institutions are often exempt from federal and state standards for special needs education. So while corporate schools participating in the program get a nice chunk of tuition and profit in the form of taxpayer money, the most vulnerable students don't get a decent education. But wait, there's more. The so-called Environmental Literacy Act requires public school science teachers to teach the controversy about global warming. In other words, it forces public school teachers to use the fossil fuel industry's big lie and teach kids about Flat Earth Society's pseudoscience that denies man-made global warming. A quick glance at ALEC's backers reveals the real reason for this push to so-called education reform. As that Center for Media and Democracy report points out, for-profit education corporations like Corinthian Colleges and K-12 Inc., whose CEOs serve on ALEC's Education Task Force, by coincidence, all stand to make big bucks when states approve ALEC's legislation. And you and I, of course, are expected to foot the bill with our taxpayer dollars, paying for vouchers and subsidies. Privatize the gains, socialize the losses. ALEC's education plan is the classic conservative get-rich scheme. And if we don't do something quick, it could be game over for public education in America. For more on this, I'm joined by Mike Papantonio, attorney and host of Ring of Fire Radio. Pap, welcome back.
Tom, how are you?
I'm fine, and I should add, Ring of Fire TV as well. So, Pap, you heard my intro. ALEC is systematically chipping away at our public schools, yet there doesn't seem to be much of a public outcry. How did we get here?
Well, the good thing about what's happening with ALEC, if you recall, Color of Change got involved with the ALEC picture, and we finally started hearing about who they were and how disgusting their conduct was when we started hearing about Stand Your Ground from the Zimmerman case. Then we learned that they're also the same people that came up with the 3 strikes rule. They're the same people that came up with truth in sentencing. They're the same people that came up with minimum mandatory rules state by state. And they're the same people who imprison more Americans than any other democracy in the world, more people than any other democracy in the world. And at the same time, we're the people pushing to privatize prisons so they could make money on all of those people that they privatized, on all the people they put in prison. So, look, school privatization, the austerity myth, union busting, gerrymandering, anti-environment, government packing the courts with right-wing judges, all of that comes from ALEC. What's so incredible, Tom, what is so remarkable to me is it's been going on for so long. Early on, years ago, we were talking about, I think you were talking about, I was talking about the idea that ALEC was a group that was inviting judges, federal judges, state court judges to these huge seminars. They were inviting legislators to these seminars. They were writing bills that the legislator would take back to the state and then enact into a law. They're willing to pimp for whoever can pay them enough money, provided that that pimping takes place for the right-wing ideology types that they represent. So the good that's come out of, there's very little good that came out of the Zimmerman case, Tom. But one good that came out is people started saying, who in the hell are these bottom feeders? And now we at least have a picture of who they are because of organizations like Color of Change.
Now, ALEC started, or it was co-founded back in the early 80s during the Reagan campaign or thereabouts by Paul Weyrich and others.
Right.
And I understand that a couple of times a year they literally get together one-to-one, state legislators, almost all Republicans, and lobbyists and representatives of big corporations. Those big corporations have already written legislation that benefits the big corporations, and they together fine-tune that legislation so that these Republican legislators can then take it back to their home states and introduce it under their own names. Is that a reasonably accurate description? And if so, why is America not just, why are our heads not exploding?
Well, it's because we don't. It's because we don't really. We've become so numb to outrageous conduct by organizations like ALEC. I mean, we've really become numb to it. And look, it's more than just, Tom, than them holding a meeting once a year. You understand, they load up on their private jets, they fly to places like Florida, they meet with the 4 or 5 key legislators in that state, along with the governor, they make promises about how much money their billionaire babies can raise for them, and then they say, oh, by the way, let me pull this out of my briefcase, this is what we want you to do for fracking. We want to make sure that you promote fracking in your state. We want to make sure that you deconstruct education to where you privatize it all and we can make money on it. It's far more insidious, Tom, than even the media reports. We saw firsthand them coming in on their jets to Florida, meeting with key legislators, writing the legislation to the point to where it should have been a shameless embarrassment for the legislators that were introducing the legislation because it was written word for word by the way corporate America wrote it. So look, this is all, you recall we've talked about before the Sagebrush Rebellion. The Sagebrush Rebellion is where they launched the borax soap salesman Ronald Reagan into the political agenda, the narrative in America. That was just part of it. The second part was we have to have think tanks, we have to have organizations like ALEC that do the thinking for the real dummies in state legislators to where they can look like they have some original thoughts. And part of the way they do that is to write the legislation, feed it to the dummy, and then make it law in whatever state. For example, Stand Your Ground. 26 states are, now, we have 26 states at a minimum that have the most draconian type of stand your ground laws. That didn't just happen by accident. It happened by them jumping on their jets, going to the state, and actually face-to-face lobbying these this low-hanging fruit state to state.
Yeah. 2 quick questions, Pap. I'm curious your thoughts on the parent trigger law. This is apparently one of ALEC's newest little creations. And secondly, I'm curious your take on the news in the wake of the George Zimmerman verdict.
Well, the take on the news was what I expected. It is that, yes, if you look at the way the case was presented, the prosecution did I think, a horrible job, first of all. Second of all, in order to get a conviction with this law that we have in Florida, it was almost impossible. I mean, because if you read the jury instruction, Tom, as a matter of fact, I have it right here. It says, if George Zimmerman was not engaged in an unlawful activity and was attacked, then he has the right to stand his ground to defend himself or some third party. Well, that's the last thing the jury heard. Unfortunately, the prosecution never built, they knew it was coming. It's a standard jury instruction in the state of Florida. They never built their attack around that. They built it around race, and it took them in the wrong place. But the point being, it was almost impossible when you look at that jury instruction, unless you've really built your attack around the jury instruction, it was impossible for the prosecution to win, and it was very evident from day one.
But that jury instruction came out of a law that was passed in Florida back in 2005, signed by Jeb Bush, proposed by ALEC, was it not?
That's right. It was written. It was written by Alec. And add to that, Tom, they already had just a pure self-defense law in Florida was already pretty encompassing, and it is in most states. In most states where Alec went in and they tried to give NRA this big bonus, this was all for NRA. NRA was pimping their way, paying the money, and they were just paying these guys to come up with any legislation that would sell more guns. This sold a lot more guns, and but they did this in states where the self-defense law was already very clear. They already had a great self-defense law, but this was just a bonus. It was almost as if the NRA said, you know what, we've gotten everything we want from the feds. The federal legislation has been great for us. We can sell any kind of damn weapon we want, any kind of killing machine we want. Let's go ahead and continue overreaching. So they went to the states with this stand your ground law, and as I said, the three-strike law, the truth in sentencing law, the minimum mandatory law, they just accomplished so much that the real right wing of this country said, you know, we have this opportunity. We have all of these state governors, all these state legislators. Let's take advantage of it. And that's when you saw the real push by Alec.
And now the next step is to suppress voters and voting.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course, you understand, as you've always pointed out, the real voter suppression laws originated with Alec. Alec, let me tell you, they do go about hiring very good constitutional writers. You know, they hire the writer that understands that you still have to face a court somewhere. So you have to write the law to where it's constitutionally valid. It may stand on its own. They do a very good job. As corrupt as they are and disgusting as they are, they have very good people working for them. They go out and they get the best people that will do anything for the right amount of money. They draft these laws that are, for the most part, pretty foolproof in the way that they draft them. And then they just unleash them state by state.
Oh, amazing. Mike Papantonio, thanks so much for being with us, Pap.
Thank you, Tom.
ringofireradio.com, by the way. Coming up, the GOP and its austerity hawk allies have been warning us for years that the American economy is drowning in a sea of sovereign debt. Economist Steve Keen will join me after the break to explain why they are wrong.